Hello, welcome back. Today we are talking about fiber, hydration, and digestion. If this is your first time with us, I'm Megan. I'm a registered dietitian with Belle, and I'm super excited to cover this topic. Now, this is going to be a quick review, but we already cover a lot of this, a lot more of the science and the why in the 12-week course. So if you have more questions after today's live, be sure to go check out the 12-week course. There are multiple lessons on GI symptoms, fiber, hydration, digestion in general. And so you can get a little bit more, but today is really about how. It's more about practicality around how are we going to shift your fiber intake? How are we going to shift your hydration? How are we going to support your digestion in order to help you feel your best while on a GLP? So as we've said many times before, GLP medications slow stomach emptying. That's how they work. And that's what helps you feel fuller sooner and stay fuller longer. But that also means that food, fiber, and fluids are moving through your system differently than they used to. And many people are doing objectively good things, right? Eating fiber and drinking water, and they're still feeling constipated or they're still struggling with bloating. And that doesn't mean that they're doing it wrong. It just usually means that the medication has caused a shift and we need to tweak our strategy. But as always, before we dive into today's topic, we're going to start with our wins. If you've been to previous lives, you know that we do this because naming wins activates our prefrontal cortex. It improves our learning, our problem solving. It gives our brain a little boost of dopamine and a little proof of progress, all of which is going to help to build our self-confidence, our consistency, and our long-term success. So I am going to give you 20 seconds to write down your win for the week. I hope that you've started collecting these somewhere, whether that's in a journal or on your phone, but each week we'll be doing this. I would really strongly encourage you to be doing this daily, but start collecting that proof of progress to help build your self-efficacy and long-term success. So I'm going to give you 20 seconds to jot one down. Okay. Sorry, my slides for some reason have stopped working. There we go. Okay, they just needed a second to catch up. All right. All right, as a quick review, when food stays in our stomach longer and gut motility slows, right? The movement through our gut, that same meal that used to feel just fine can suddenly feel really heavy, really uncomfortable. Fullness and reflux might be making liquids not very desirable, maybe making it so that we're not wanting to drink. Our thirst cues can be dampened on GLP-1s, and smaller meals naturally mean less food, less total fiber, often less fluid without even realizing it. So most digestion issues that I see on GLPs aren't about damage, they're just about a mismatch between intake, timing, fiber, and hydration. And once we adjust those, symptoms often improve significantly. So in the course, we talk about fiber goals and recommendations. Here, I want you to think a little bit differently. On a GLP-1, fiber success isn't only about hitting a perfect number, it's about how fiber shows up across the whole day. Large fiber loads all at once can overwhelm your slower system, but small repeated exposures, even modest ones, are going to work a lot better. Consistency matters more than intensity right now when it comes to fiber. So we want to work on gradually increasing our fiber intake, varying the types of fiber that we're eating, drinking enough water, and small frequent portions. And not all fiber does the same thing. So insoluble fiber helps move things along, move food through our GI system. It can help with that transit time. Soluble fiber helps to soften stools and regulate digestion. Now, they do more than this, but we're just talking about in the context of digestion. Fermentable fibers help support our gut through feeding our microbiome. But if we add too much of any of these too quickly, they can cause a lot of discomfort, bloating, gas, sometimes diarrhea, or in the case of soluble fiber, sometimes constipation if not enough hydration is present. So we want to make sure that we're getting enough of these foods, including foods from all three categories, but not overdoing it. And this is where fiber starts to actually work for us. On GLPs, the biggest mistake people make isn't choosing the wrong fiber. It's getting too much of one type at one time. So your slower digestive system does a lot better, again, with small, repeated exposure. And since most plants provide a mix of soluble and insoluble fibers, you can really not worry too much about the type of fiber and just ensure that you're getting a variety of fiber. You're getting a variety of different plant foods at every meal. So what that might look like at breakfast, we're including oats and berries. Or maybe at lunch, we're going to be adding in some vegetables or grains or beans or legumes. We might be adding fruit or nuts or seeds to our snack and rounding out the day with some vegetables and a high fiber starch at dinner, ensuring that there's small amounts throughout the day. So the goal isn't necessarily just a large, I'm getting 30 grams of fiber. If 20 of that is coming in one meal, that's not going to feel very good. So this spacing matters. It's going to help reduce bloating and gas, improve stool consistency, improve gut motility, and it's going to feel a lot more tolerable. Another important piece, as I mentioned though, is fluid. Fiber works by holding on to water, right? Soluble fiber creates a gel. It only does that if there's water. Insoluble fiber pulls water through to help move transit time. Can't do that without water. So if our fluids are low, fiber is going to make constipation worse. It's going to make bloating and gas worse. So instead of asking, am I eating enough fiber, right? We want to go a little deeper than that. We want to say, am I spreading my fiber out? Is fiber showing up at every meal and snack? And am I getting enough water with that fiber? This shift alone usually improves digestion for a lot of people. And that's with my clients on and off GLP-1s. Because if they're eating tons of fiber at one meal and not enough at the other, symptoms show up, even without a GLP. So how much fiber should you be getting at meals and snacks? That's going to vary from person to person, but this is where I would start. First, start by tracking your normal fiber intake. Do this for at least 3 days, but I would highly recommend at least a week and include your weekend meals because our weekend eating tends to look different than our weekday eating. And we really want to see what that looks like because it could be that you're eating good amounts of fiber spreading out through the week and then the weekend throws you off and you start to have symptoms again. So be sure to be tracking, ideally at least one weekend day, but it would be great if it was a whole week. Once you have that average, then we're going to work from there. Most Americans are only eating on average about 14 grams of fiber a day. Now, with a smaller appetite, you might be even lower than that. That's okay. We're just going to start where you're at. So once you have your average, you're going to add 2 to 4 grams, and that's your new daily goal. You're going to hold that for 1 to 3 weeks, depending on how well you're tolerating it. And then we're going to continue to do that. So if you tracked and maybe your fiber did okay during the week, but it plummeted during the weekend and your average was 12 grams, then we're going to aim for about 15 grams. And we're going to aim for that every single day. We want to make sure that that's very consistent. Once you're consistently hitting 15 grams and it's feeling good, then we're going to add another 2 to 4 grams, right? So the new goal is now 18 grams. We're going to repeat this until we get close to 30 grams a day. This could take a while, and that's okay. So under our nutrition resources for Belle, I've created this Fiber Made Simple handout. This can be great for getting ideas of how to add that 2 to 4 grams, or even just for tracking how much fiber you're typically getting. And keep in mind that you don't have to do full portions here. Again, small amounts frequently is better right now. And we need to give time for our bodies to adjust to that fiber intake. Remember, fiber is food for our microbiome. If we flood our system with too much food, it's overwhelming to them. They can't digest it all. They can't do that. It's going to ferment on its own. It's going to cause problems, diarrhea, gas, bloating. We need to give time for our microbiome to reproduce and to be able to handle that larger amount of fiber. So for a lot of my clients, we start with even half or quarter portions of fiber. right? They might choose something on this list that's really high in fiber and be like, I love this food. That would be great for me to include daily, but a full amount may not work well for them right now. It might be too overwhelming to their slowed down GI system. So we might start with a half or a quarter. For some of my clients, it's like chia seeds. I love chia seeds. I can sprinkle those on things, but a tablespoon might be overwhelming to them right now. We start with a teaspoon and then we slowly build that up. Same with things like black beans or legumes, lentils, right? A full half cup or cup might be way too overwhelming and cause gas and bloating for them. We might start with 2 tablespoons, and they're eating 2 tablespoons every single day until they tolerate it great. And then we're adding another 2 tablespoons and just slowly building it up. So use this resource to help you start to get ideas of how to add fiber. And then again, we're just aiming to add 2 to 4 to your average right now and hold that steady for at least a week. If you've been really frustrated by fiber in the past, that's okay. I see these frustrations arise in a few different areas. First, oftentimes supplementation can be a big problem when people try to fix constipation and they overdo it. They might do this with a supplement, or sometimes I see it in like kale salads. They go from eating nothing to like this huge 15-gram fiber salad, and it causes some problems for them. And it can make their symptoms worse. The other one I see is that they start eating just too much fiber in general, and then it can sometimes lead to diarrhea, or they're not drinking enough water and they're getting more constipated. So they're like, I'm eating more fiber, but I'm like so constipated. This is not working. Right. And then another one I see is that inconsistency again. And that one I see commonly with clients on and off GLP medications, skipping meals or changing how they eat on the weekends, making it look very different. Their GI system is swinging from way too much fiber to too little fiber. And they might be having symptoms like diarrhea to constipation. And it's going back and forth, and they feel like their GI system is broken and they're so frustrated. And oftentimes it comes down to inconsistency with their fiber intake, inconsistency with their meal intake, and inadequate hydration. All right. So again, I've said this multiple times, but it's very important. Hydration and fiber are going to work together. So we need to make sure that hydration is also spread throughout the day. We don't need to drink 60 ounces in the morning and then nothing else. We want to make sure that fluids are happening consistently with the fiber. The fiber needs that in real time to be working, right? So we want fluids throughout the day. Because GLPs dampen our thirst cues, hydration needs to be very intentional on these medications. So sipping throughout the day, warm beverages like tea or coffee can actually help stimulate gut motility. And so if you're struggling with constipation, you might consider drinking a decent amount of fluid, but maybe some of that warm, and that might help. We want to do fluids between meals. That's often better tolerated if you're having a lot of distended bloating and you're really full and not tolerating the large portions right now. Drinking fluids between meals can make it more tolerable, or if you're having a lot of reflux, fluids between meals. And then also remember that fluids in meals count. So choosing things like soups or smoothies can help boost hydration if we're having a hard time getting enough water. And if your intake is really low, electrolytes can also help. So you might consider taking an electrolyte supplement for a minute. We'll talk more about that in just a minute. All right, the next thing is movement. This is one of the most effective and overlooked digestion tools, and it doesn't really need to be intense movement. In fact, very intense exercise can actually worsen digestive symptoms if you're already underfueled or dehydrated. So what works best is low-level, consistent movement. Even a 5 to 10-minute walk after meals can help move food through the stomach, reduce that full filling, decrease bloating and gas, support regular bowel movements. It also is going to help with regulating our nervous system, which has a downstream effect because stress can help or can disrupt our digestive system, right? It can make it so that it slows motility more, decreases digestive enzymes, can cause more bloating, more gas. So indirectly helping with stress management, movement can help with that as well. And so this is why I often recommend short walks after meals, light stretching in the evening, getting up and doing movement. I call it snacks, movement snacks throughout the day, right? If you're at a desk sitting for long periods of time, could you get up and do 30 squats every hour? Could we do some push-ups? Could we do something to start just moving our bodies more? Ideally, a walk or something like that that's going to create that nice rhythm to help move through, but any movement is going to help. So if digestion has felt off before we add tons of fiber or before we add a supplement, ask yourself, how much fiber am I getting? Am I spreading it throughout the day? Am I drinking enough water? Am I moving throughout the day? Am I walking for at least 30 minutes a day? Often those simple tweaks are the missing piece that can help with digestion. Okay, again, if you want more on this, then head into the 12-week course. There are multiple lessons that hit on digestion. So let's shift into the questions. Each week, I'll be taking a few of the questions submitted by you and answering them. If your question isn't answered, stay tuned. It will be. And if you submitted a question, or if you'd like to submit a question, email care@joinbelle.com and it'll be added to the next week's queues. I typically get them on Mondays. So if you submitted one like yesterday, it'll be on next week's queue. All right, so the first one is, do I need a fiber supplement? This question worked great with this lesson. Fiber supplements can be really useful, especially if appetite is low, but again, we want to be cautious and slow with these. And they are not the fix. We want to layer supplementation on top of a foundation of food or of consistent food, consistent fiber, consistent fluid, consistent movement. So they're a tool to be added to those other tools. They don't replace those tools. So helpful when intake is really low, or if your constipation is persisting, or you're having a really hard time tolerating a lot of fiber. Sometimes choosing a fiber supplement can be really helpful as long as you start low, we increase slowly, and we do it with a lot of fluid. So my go-to with clients, especially on a GLP-1, is psyllium husk. It tends to be really well tolerated, doesn't cause a lot of bloating and gas. It's a soluble fiber, which means that it's going to help to create nice soft stools. And so it tends to be the one that my clients like versus something like a fiber one bar or something that is going to be an insoluble fiber that's going to create potentially diarrhea. Right? This one helps to help with constipation by softening stools, making them easier to move, but not necessarily increasing frequency. So depending on what your symptoms are, you may want to choose a different fiber source, but I would start with psyllium husk, see how that feels. And then I usually tell my clients to start with a half dose and double the water. So if it says to do like a teaspoon, I like the powder more than the pills. I think they work better. So for my clients, if it's a teaspoon, right, or 2 teaspoons that we're aiming for, we might start with just 1 or a half. And usually it says to mix with about 8 ounces of water. I usually tell my clients, drink 8 ounces of water, then mix it with 8 ounces of water and drink that. So they're getting a total of 16 ounces. I find that just works better. It just more water at that time. That might be difficult to do. And so maybe you're going to do a half of a teaspoon with 4 ounces of water, 4 ounces of water before. But again, doubling the water that's recommended is what I would recommend. Start, and psyllium husk powder can be a great place to start. Okay, why do some people lose weight on low doses while others need higher ones? This is a great question. Keep in mind that GLP medications are just like any other medication, right? And so our response is going to vary widely. Not everyone needs the same dose of ibuprofen for a headache. Not everyone needs the same dose of GLP for blood sugar management or for weight management. This is going to vary widely, depend on your genetics, your baseline insulin resistance. So how much you're going to need for blood sugar regulation, gut hormone sensitivity can be, some people have lower levels of leptin naturally. And so that's going to impact this. Appetite regulation, your history of dieting can impact how much you're going to need, your muscle mass, and your metabolic rate. So all of these are going to play a role in how you're going to tolerate the medication and how much you might need. Some people are really sensitive and they're going to notice appetite changes on really low doses. Others are going to need higher doses before they experience any meaningful change, especially if they have a lower level of those gut hormones to begin with. So needing a higher dose is not really a problem, right? It just means that you need a higher dose, and that's okay. Our goal is always to find the minimum amount, right? That's why titration exists, is so that we can find the lowest effective dose for you, but that's for you. It doesn't need to look like anybody else. You don't need to compare your dose to someone else's. You're not failing or doing something wrong if you need a higher dose than someone else. It just means that you have a different history, genetic profile, and body than someone else. Okay, can GLPs affect cortisol, thyroid function, or stress hormones? I want to be really clear about scope here. As a dietitian, I don't diagnose or manage thyroid or adrenal conditions. That's something that your prescribing provider or endocrinologist should always be evaluating, and you should be talking about concerns with them. So what I can share though is the research at a population level, right? Like I'm not going to talk about individuals here. That's outside my scope, but we can talk about based on the research, right? In large human clinical trials, GLP medications have not been shown to directly damage thyroid function or suppress adrenal hormones unless people have underlying diseases, right? So this is why it's always important to talk to your provider. If you have an endocrinologist, include them into the discussion on GLP medications. But for the average healthy person, this is not going to, as far as we know right now from the research, it's not going to damage or have a negative effect on your thyroid or your adrenal function. Now, it might have an indirect effect. And this can happen when intake is really low or meals are skipped, your hydration is poor, or your stress is high. In those cases, the body is going to create stress hormones like cortisol as a protective response. That's not the medication that's causing that necessarily. It's more of a downstream effect. The medication is causing you to underfuel potentially, right? That underfueling, not eating enough, can be really stressful and all on its own increase cortisol. So if someone is experiencing symptoms like fatigue or hair loss or feeling off, the first step is always to look at their intake, their hydration, their recovery. Are you eating enough food? And then I would also loop in your medical provider too, especially if symptoms persist. Okay, does dehydration feel different on a GLP-1? I'm not really sure what you mean by different, as I don't know how you were identifying dehydration before. But GLP-1s do decrease or dampen your thirst cues, right? So when those thirst cues are blunted, just like appetite, the signal to thirst may not be as strong. And so you might be more dehydrated than you ever previously were getting without realizing it because your thirst cues aren't telling you to drink. And so it might just be that this feels different because you're more dehydrated. And dehydration doesn't always show up as just feeling thirsty, right? Especially on a GLP-1. And so it might be showing up as constipation, fatigue, headaches, nausea, dizziness, increased bloating. So if it feels different because now you're like, wow, I'm getting like really dizzy or I'm getting headaches a lot or things like that, it's likely because you're just more dehydrated. So because digestion is slower, and fluids are usually less, right? It's going to be even more important to make sure that your hydration is something that you're very aware of, you're paying attention to, you're very intentional with it. So again, sipping throughout the day, not waiting until you feel thirsty or trying to catch up, not trying to do large amounts of fluid at once. We want to make sure that it's consistent throughout the day. If you suspect dehydration, you're probably dehydrated. So I would work on increasing your fluids and consider an electrolyte supplement and see if that's a great option for you. Be sure to choose one though that isn't super high in sodium unless you know you need sodium. Most Americans are getting way more sodium than they need, and the electrolytes that we're really low on are potassium. Sometimes calcium and magnesium as well, but potassium is typically the one that most Americans are not getting enough. We tend to invert our recommendations there. So we should be getting about 2 grams of sodium, 4 to 5 grams of potassium. Most Americans are getting 4 to 5 grams of sodium and about 2 grams of potassium. So not nearly enough potassium. So just adding more electrolytes, more sodium to that mix may not necessarily help as much unless we know you need sodium, unless you know your sodium intake is low, unless you're doing intense, workouts and sweating a lot and it's really hot and you're losing a lot of sodium in sweat. I would recommend a low sodium electrolyte, one that's higher in potassium to help with that ratio a little bit more. Personally, I really like the Ultima and the Nectar brands. So those are both ones that are higher potassium, lower sodium. They also provide other electrolytes like calcium and magnesium as well. Okay, I want to close up the class today. We're right about at time. So remember, GLP medications are going to change your digestion. That is on purpose. That is how they work. Slower gastric emptying is part of that. Um, but that also means that digestion support might need to shift as well. So most digestion issues on GLPs aren't signs that something's wrong. They're just feedback that we need to make some shifts. They're just a mismatch between what we're doing and what our system needs right now. And they're just your body telling you that the strategy is not quite working. So when we work with our system, we use smaller portions, repeated fiber exposures throughout the whole day, pairing fiber with fluids, slowly increasing our fiber intake to that 30 grams, staying hydrated and moving throughout the day. Digestion often improves in really practical ways. I know this doesn't seem super exciting. Sorry, probably the same boring stuff that you've heard, but this is what often helps for a lot of people. We just have to be consistent with it long enough for it to actually help. So it's not about doing everything perfectly or hitting these exact numbers, but building rhythms and consistency. So these are the small changes that make effect over time. And remember that better digestion on GLPs doesn't come from doing more. It just comes from doing the things that matter, doing things a little bit differently, adjusting and listening to our bodies. So if you have additional questions, please see the 12-week course, reach out or submit them to Belle. You can do that again at oh my goodness, care@joinbell.com. I forgot the email. And you can submit those questions, and I'm happy to dive into that more. If you want to email me personally, that's also just fine. You can do that at megan@meganjanesplate.com. All right, until next week, we'll see you then.